It is, for me, a chunk of the pleasure of the job. You are doing something fundamentally pretty remarkable. You talk about your dad. My dad went on a plane once in his life when I took him on a BA flight. He was blown away and grew up at a time when there were a lot less planes around. And it's a remarkable thing that airlines are managing to do, and all their supporters around the ecosystem.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Travel Trends Podcast. This is your host, Dan Christian, and we're about to begin our final series of Season 6, and we have a big finish plan for you. We have a 3-part series on aviation and a major contest that I am super excited to share these details with you. It's a thank you to all of our listeners for supporting us over the years, and with Season 6, our biggest, most ambitious season yet, and especially as we start 2026, given our plans for Season 7, Season 8, our next summit, all of the spotlight episodes and custom series we're working on, the events that we're a part of. We have such a big, bright year ahead, and it's all thanks to our listeners. And so I loved giving prizes away at our AI Summit. I'm not trying to be Oprah or Ellen, but I love giving the gift of travel. And I'm also a big fan of Hayes luggage. I travel with Hayes luggage, and I want to make sure that our listeners have the opportunity. And I can't wait to see one of our listeners rocking Hayes luggage at the airport, and it being someone that won it by virtue of listening to our podcast and posting and sharing. And just a bit of context, Hayes is a Canadian travel brand, but they're global. It's a family business that you're actually going to hear more about on an episode of our Travel Trends Spotlight featuring their CEO, Emran Sheikh. It's an incredibly inspiring family story. He's taken over the family business. His daughters work in the business. When you look at this company, it's incredible to see its global scale and the types of products that they offer. And then you meet the person and the family behind this business. It makes it that much more meaningful, which is why I love doing this podcast. And I'm really keen to share that spotlight episode that will be going live in the next week. So look out for a spotlight episode on the Hayes CEO, Emran Sheikh, who has kindly made this contest possible for all of our listeners. And all you need to do to be entered to win a set of Hayes Astro luggage is post on social media, whether it be LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram, or TikTok, whatever your preferred social media is. We just want to hear one highlight from Season 6, one of your favorite guests, or one of the topics that we covered, and let the world know that you're excited for Season 7. That's all we ask, and just make sure that you tag at Travel Trends Podcast. We'll be looking for those every week, and I will announce the first winner on next week's episode, where we speak to the head of disruption at Hopper. But in today's episode, as we kick off our Aviation Series, we are speaking to Roger Blackburn, who is the VP of Loyalty and Commercial at oneworld, which is one of the world's largest airline alliances. More than 15 airlines belong to this, from British Airways to Qantas to Qatar. And very interestingly, Roger's background was more than 25 years at British Airways, and he spent the last 7 years at oneworld. So it's a perfect person to bring into the conversation to kick off 2026, wrap up our Season 6 of our podcast, to talk about the emerging destinations, how airlines are changing based on consumer interest and demand. And even one of the things that I talk about with Emran Sheikh in the Spotlight episode is how things like luggage is changing in this new era of reduced cabin sizes and what you can actually bring on a plane. So with some of the things that I am very keen to talk to Roger that we cover today are all related to seeing my son's passion for travel. I think most of our listeners know that my son is in his first year of university studying to become a pilot, and I've spent half of my time traveling and the rest of the time, as he's been growing up, back at the airport, because he's been an avid plane spotter. He had a YouTube channel. I've gotten so immersed into the world of aviation. So I'm so keen to bring this series to life, and I'm sure it's going to be of great interest to all of our listeners as well. So make sure that you are subscribed on the streaming platform of your choice to be notified when new episodes go live. And of course, we post clips and highlights on all our social channels, LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram. So you can check those out and follow along for highlights from the guests, including Roger, who I'm going to bring on now because we have so much to cover. Thanks again to all of our listeners. I look forward to seeing many of your posts over the next few weeks to highlight some aspect of Season 6 and your excitement for Season 7. Thanks again to the team at Hayes for sponsoring. If you want more information, check out hayes.com. That's HEYS.com. And now let's bring in the star of this episode, Roger Blackburn from oneworld. Roger, it's great to have you with us. Thanks so much for joining us on Travel Trends.
Thank you very much, Dan. Thank you.
Well, it's a thrill to have you here, especially given background and introduction you have, all the years you spent at British Airways, the fact that oneworld is obviously there are a couple of the world's largest alliances. I am a Star Alliance guy. Now, just to establish that off the top, I know heartbreak. It's because I'm based in Canada, right? But I love British Airways. I love Qantas, and I do love oneworld. But I accumulate most of my points and miles at Star Alliance. But I want the world to know more about you and specifically oneworld and where this industry is headed. But let's start with a bit of your background, Roger. Tell us a little bit how you got into the aviation space.
Well, how did I get here? Like many people, I guess I thought working for an airline would somehow be cool, and I wanted to travel the world, and I had this idea that maybe if I worked for an airline, I'd get to travel the world. And I was genuinely one of those guys trying to work out, a bit like my kids now, what the hell do I do with my life? Where do I go? And I'd done various things at college. None of them were screaming a particular job. So yeah, I kind of drifted in. And like many people, I came in thinking, oh, maybe I could do this for a little bit. And then there is something about the airline industry, which I'm sure you will see in others you have on here, where you kind of get hooked, and wow, 30 years later, you are still hanging around airlines, and you're still loving it, and you're still finding new things to learn and try out.
Yeah, and now we should establish for everyone, too, that you're based in London. Obviously, you've got a great English accent that people are picking up on very quickly. But tell us a little bit about where you're based and how that impacted your career in terms of starting with British Airways and then continuing on with oneworld. Yeah,
sure. So, London, I've actually lived in London all my life. And many of my colleagues have very different backgrounds and move around the world, but I'm pretty static here. When you live in such a fantastic city, it's hard to drag yourself away. And when you live in such a fantastic city, the obvious the airline. I guess we're lucky here. We've got several great airlines in the UK, but I got this love of BA very early on. Iconic brand, and came in and drank the Kool-Aid, and it's very, very hard to move away from that, and from BA. oneworld. BA was a founding member for oneworld. I saw oneworld grow up. I never had much to do with oneworld. I did a whole variety of things in the airline, and one of the joys of working in an airline is you can have a pretty diverse career. But when I was looking for something new to do about 6 years ago, the idea of coming and working with a wider family of airlines that I felt shared BA's values was just too good to turn down.
It's one of the reasons I was so keen to have you on the Aviation Series of Travel Trends, because we did a loyalty deep dive this season, and obviously that's a big part of your current role. But given that you've got such a deep understanding of the airline space, having spent 28 years at British Airways and then the last 7 years at oneworld, I think you have a unique perspective and also expertise on what's happening in the airline space, because, this is what I want to emphasize to our audience, especially given my background, is that, you get so much understanding when you work within one business, but then when you work across different airlines, which is effectively what you do now with, a global role, the Americas, Europe, Middle East, Africa, you have a really unique understanding of where this industry is and where it's headed in 2026 and beyond. But let's make sure our audience understands oneworld Alliance. Would you mind giving us, you just mentioned about how it was formed and BA being a forming partner, but tell us a bit about oneworld Alliance, how it was established, and what that company is and does.
Sure. So we were founded getting on for 27 years ago now, and the original set of members were American Airlines, BA, Cathay, and Qantas. And it was very much at that time when airlines were looking out across the world, wondering how they could do more in collaboration with partners, recognizing the need. Increasingly, business is global, travel is supporting that is a really key part of what airlines do, and no one airline can do all of that together. Hence the the move to building partnerships, which grew into these initially quite small alliances, which has grown into where we are now with three really, really significant alliances that span the majority of the major airline demand across the globe. And oneworld has very much been coming out of the ethos of those original carriers and the ones we've been lucky enough to bring into the group over that time. Very much a premium focus, very much a quality focus. 40% of the Sky of oneworld is in the Skytrax top 20. We really do over leverage on premium and business, and because of that, we really take loyalty very, very significantly. We have a very generous loyalty program. So it's that kind of stuff that I think is the core to the why we're here and what drives us.
Yeah, and one of the things I wanted to get into with you is the B2B and B2C side. And obviously, you know, Roger, that our audience is largely B2B. There are some people listen to our podcast that are travelers that are just interested in the industry. But one of the things I wanted to start off with is the B2B side. And so you've got 15 member airlines across 6 continents, and you have to manage that collaboration. First thing I wanted just to understand from a business point of view is what's in it for the airlines. So just, and some of those may be obvious, and certainly there's a number that stand out to me, but I'd just love to hear it from your perspective when you're looking at, and I just want to acknowledge too, that I am a oneworld member. I signed up when I was living in Australia because of Qantas. So, you know, and that's why I mentioned in the beginning that because I'm based in Toronto and I fly mainly with Air Canada, but there's a benefit to having membership in multiple programs depending on where you are and where you're traveling, and so I'll get into the consumer side later because I'm keen to know some of the differences in oneworld's program. But from a B2B point of view, when you're looking at the airlines that you work with, what are the benefits of airlines being part of the oneworld alliance?
The key one is the connecting traffic. We any one airline cannot meet all the or cannot serve all the destinations that they would like to serve, that their customers want to serve, want to fly to. So it gives you that expanded reach, while being able to continue to build that base of loyal customers within your organisation. So you don't have to say go to the competition. You can say go to my partners. Stay within the alliance overall. So that's the absolutely key thing. I mean, now we're together. We find there's a lot of value that comes from just the scale, leveraging the scale of the alliance. We can do things as a group that we simply can't do. That the individual airlines would be able to do in a much less impactful way. So we may talk about sustainability at a later point, but we've just launched a massive fund, 150 million in partnership with Breakthrough Energy Ventures, and that's something where we've got currently 5, soon to be probably more of the members participating together, and it's something that just needs scale, and it's something that's very hard to do if you're an individual airline. And there are other examples like that where that scale is key. The last thing I think all airlines get, and all individuals who get associated, there's a lot of learning. I mean, you talked about the diversity of the organisations in the airline industry and how that's fascinating. You put airline people together; they want to learn from each other. They are fascinated. It's a rather amazing thing. You can be in a room with a bunch of people, and culturally, you can feel very different from them. And maybe you're struggling a bit with the language. When you start speaking airline, you realise actually you've got this rich set of common understanding, and you can explore a lot of things, and you can learn a lot from each other. So I think it's a combination of those things: the hard economics of the feed, the scale, and the lessons you can learn.
Well, just on that note, with new member airlines coming into oneworld, I was genuinely keen to know what that process looks like. We had during our loyalty series, KM Malta Airlines, which is a regional carrier that I'm sure you're familiar with. And so,
I heard. Yep.
And globally, there are a number of smaller and regional airlines. But obviously, as you highlighted, one of the biggest opportunities for for airlines to benefit from is the global connectivity. So if you've missed a flight and you missed your connection, and you can work within the One World Alliance to be able to make sure your traveler gets to where they need to go. So you can really benefit from that capacity, which myself being a very frequent traveler, it's why I'm very dedicated to programs and maintaining status. So when it comes to a new member airline, what ultimately makes a good fit? So if we have airlines that are listening to this, they're thinking, wait a second, when would I be in a position to join One World? But yeah, what does that look like as far as bringing new members into the group? Because I know you've had Oman Air recently and Fiji Airways join the alliance. So yeah, tell us a little bit more about how that works.
Yeah, so the first thing we're looking for is network fit. We're looking for an airline that will bring destinations to the One World network that we're currently not serving, and we like as an alliance to generally minimise the overlap. That's not necessarily the approach that all the alliances take, but we're trying to, as far as possible, spread out across the globe and serve different areas independently. So network fit is the first thing. Absolutely core for us though is the quality and the service ethic. So we want an airline that delivers great service, probably with a bias towards premium, and is going to fit from a point of it's going to make sense ultimately to a customer who gets onto a plane. Oh yes, I see why this airline is part of One World. I get that. I can feel it as I sit down, as I look around, as I talk to the crew. So those are the main things. Obviously, there's a whole set of criteria around all the details and assuring each other that we're gonna meet the safety standards and everything else. But those are the core drivers.
Right. Now let's flip over to the consumer side for a moment, for everyone that's keen to know how One World differs from, say, Star Alliance or SkyTeam, kind of the three big global alliances. And again, there's benefits to all of them. There's certainly some consistency that I've seen in my experience between the benefits of being a member of them. But let's talk about the One World priority benefits, because obviously I love fast track lanes and lounge access, but tell us a little bit about the benefits that someone gets when they become One World that they can use across all the airlines in the group.
Sure, and yes, there are, exactly as you say, fast track. If you're a tiered member of our frequent flyer schemes, you will get access to fast track. You will get access to premium check-in. We have a really, I would argue, a very generous reward scheme for our most frequent flyers. We have first class lounges that you get access to as the top tier, as the Emeralds. We have a very wide set of business lounges. So yes, absolutely. That's very much what we're trying to prioritise, and the generosity of that is key to us, and the delivery of that is key, and something we want to work on increasingly to make sure it's as tight as possible, and we're as disciplined as possible, and we're as aligned as possible in how we deliver that to the individual.
Well, one of the things I wanted to ask, because I know it's not always just about miles and points, and the loyalty space is incredibly complex. I know that's also very much your world. And so we'll maybe touch on a few things around that, but that's a conversation unto itself. And I want to make sure we stay focused on aviation. And so one of the things I wanted to know from a consumer point of view is that when you have people coming into with their own airline, so in my case, of course, I use my Aeroplan points, and I'm an Aeroplan, but I only fly wherever possible within my program, so that I can always kind of earn within that. How does it work when you have partners with their own loyalty programs kind of integrating within One World? So you kind of got this, trying to balance between the One World program and airline specific programs, and trying to make sure that the customer is always at the center of that. How do you manage that in your role? There's got to be a fair amount of complexity to that.
Yeah, and what we do is very much the the sum total of what everyone else does. We're as good as the airline schemes, and when I argue that we're great, it's because we've got great airline loyalty schemes in there. So we will bring in if we bring in a new member, we're very much going to be bringing in their loyalty scheme to participate, and if you're in one of our member airline loyalty schemes, you get the same access that everyone does across the network to anyone's metal as part of that.
And the other thing I wanted to ask before we get into technology and innovation, which I know is a big part of certainly the airline industry, it has to be. When it comes to the programs themselves and rewards and giving people recognition, what are some of the innovations you're seeing in that space that are one of the reasons where people are like, I just love oneworld because? Like, what are some of the reasons that you have such loyalty within the group?
It comes back to the quality of the product fundamentally. I mean, I would like to pretend that I can do some clever stuff to make it easier for people to do things, and I want to do some clever stuff to make it easier for people to do things, to access their benefits, to understand their benefits. You've just done a series on it. Airline loyalty is complex. If there are some guys who really master understanding the detail of this stuff, but they have more time than many of our flyers. So we absolutely want to make it easy for people to appreciate what they get, and I can help with that, and I can encourage my colleagues in the airline schemes to help with that. What ultimately drives, though, is the experience they're getting. The fact that the lounges are great, the fact that the onboard products are great. That's the core driver. I mean, you mentioned customer centricity. How do we keep the customer at the centre? I mean, another thing I would say about that is that increasingly we see our airline, the people who run our airline loyalty schemes are also the people who are looking after customer data in their organisations, and we see those two functions coming together increasingly. And these guys are absolutely steeped in what their most valuable customers want and need, and are going through and are experiencing. And they bring that into the alliance, and we all try and work together on that. And a lot of that is common stuff that we can all work from. So my job is to bring the best of them together, really, and to offer something over the top.
Yeah, well, you guys have such incredible volume and therefore data. So you have, and both at a global level and then also with the airlines themselves, to be able to understand traveler behavior, buying patterns, and to be able to ultimately provide better personalization. And that's one of the things that's always stood out to me, that and even some of the innovations within airlines. And I'll give you an exact example, and I'm keen to get your take on this because I'm usually on the receiving end of these initiatives that often must take internally 2 or 3 years to bring to life. For example, as soon as I check my bag in, I get a notification that my bag has been boarded on the plane. And some of these things, obviously, that's addressing a pain point where people are concerned about losing their luggage or it not making a connection, that type of thing. So along the lines of whether it's personalization, or some of the initiatives that you've seen across the group, what would be some of the ones that might be most interesting to our audience, whether it be how they're utilizing technology, how they're improving customer service? We'll get into sustainability in a moment, but what are some of the pilot projects or some of the initiatives that you're seeing across the group that might be interesting for our listeners?
Well, one of the things in terms of new clever technology, one of the most interesting things we've got going at the moment is something that actually customers won't see initially, but hopefully they'll get the benefits of, which is an AI tool to help our airline people understand the alliance and the different members in the alliance. There's a lot of people in the oneworld member airlines. It's over 350,000, and they're not all experts in everything. And there's a lot of information they need. And I've been in oneworld for, as you say, 6 or 7 years now. I don't know everything there is to know, far from it. So a tool that helps airline people who interpret what should be going on in the alliance, understand the rules, understand what's possible when you're a particular status on a particular product with a particular member. is immensely helpful to people who are in the front line who are delivering service, or people in the back office who are trying to resolve what's gone wrong and work out why. So we hope we will see the customers will experience that through the better information that's flowing. We may well bring that out to the front as well if that's something that can help customers going forward.
We'll be right back.
Today, 65% of travel queries trigger an AI overview. If your brand isn't showing up there, you're losing bookings. It's that simple. This is the new reality that Propellic, the AI-first digital marketing agency for travel, helps brands master. Their entire focus is on delivering what matters, performance bookings, not just clicks. They've done the research on how AI is changing everything from search to purchase. You can find their groundbreaking new report right on their website. While you're there, join over 1,000 travel marketers by subscribing to their newsletter, The Navlog. Stay ahead of the curve. Visit Propellic.com. Travel has changed, but many multi-day tour operators are still stuck with spreadsheets and disconnected systems. Today's travelers expect more: choice, flexibility, unforgettable experiences without the friction. That's where Captio comes in. Built on Salesforce, Captio is the modern platform designed specifically for multi-day tour operators. From tailor-made trips to group tours, rail to river, we bring your itineraries, bookings, payments, and operations together in one seamless system. With automation, real-time inventory, and supplier integrations, we make complex travel simple so you can do what you do best: serve travelers, not spreadsheets. Check out Captio.com for more details. PayCompass is the leading merchant processor built specifically for the travel industry. PayCompass makes it easy for travel businesses to get approved with high processing limits, so operators and agencies can scale without barriers. They deliver some of the highest authorization rates in the industry, backed by powerful chargeback mitigation services that protect revenue and reputation. Plus, with tools like virtual cards, PayCompass helps travel brands manage payments smarter and more efficiently. Simply put, PayCompass isn't just a processor. They're helping travel businesses grow stronger and faster.
And now, back to the show. So it's interesting, like airlines, airports. That's another thing that I find immensely fascinating as I've gotten more into this world and attended conferences like AFA, where our podcast is the official partner for AFA Miami. We went for the first time last year, the Aviation Festival. And what I came to understand, Roger, that you know a lot more about is ultimately how airlines work with airports as well, because airports are responsible for a lot of the guest experience and the delivery from, once you get to the gate. Then all of a sudden you're on your plane, and then when you land again, it's up to the airport. How do you manage that, out of curiosity? Because one of the things I'm keen to know is how oneworld works with all these global airports to make sure that you're in the right terminals, that you set your guests up for the best experience to be able to get for connecting flights. Tell us a little bit of how you manage that dynamic as well.
It's the alliance side of that is really the coordination aspect. So our airlines will have, typically in a particular airport, one of our airlines will probably be in the lead and have the most capacity there. There are a few airports where there's a significant amount of capacity. Here in London, most of the alliance flies into London, and there's a lot going on. So our role is very much helping the airlines work together in a coordinated way so that collectively we can influence the airport to do things that are helpful from the alliance point of view, to make sure that we're in similar locations in the terminal, to make sure that where we want it, common processes can work easily. So we can, another example of our scale, maybe we can argue for lounge space that we couldn't get individually, and so on. So we are increasingly trying to coordinate and leverage the talents of each airline in a particular location to make sure that we're offering that really good service and have productive relationships with airports. Sometimes airport relationships can be a little bit difficult because there's a fraught argument about performance and operational issues battling on, and actually stepping back and coming through oneworld is you can have a different level of conversation maybe, and unblock some of the issues that you can get in the airline world. So very much it's an important topic for us.
Well, it's interesting because you bring up an important point that I learned about just trying to shared goals. So one of the goals that I understood from the airports is, their objective is to manage the time between check-in and boarding your plane. And so there's a success metric there for them for guest experience. And the one thing that stood out to me as soon as I heard that, I was like, well, then why do I enter the duty-free shop right away? Because that's going to slow me down immediately if your success metric is speed. But the other thing I want to ask you about on this topic, Roger, is an important question around sustainability, because we started to segue into that, and I really want to discuss that now because when we think about the importance of the future of travel and being able to continue to both live on this planet and be able to limit our impact as we travel. And one of the things that always gets brought up every time a company is trying to prioritize this initiative, they always say, well, what about the airline? What about the airline? Because obviously the carbon is a real factor. And so I know airlines are under a lot of pressure to decarbonize, and the alliances are probably in a unique position to drive more collective impact. And so I'm keen to know, I know one of the big initiatives that oneworld has is a net zero 2050 goal, which is coming up faster than we realize. But tell us a little bit about the sustainability side of both oneworld and the airlines that you work with.
Yeah, sure. So we do the sort of things you would expect us to do. We are very much in the business of helping our member airlines understand where they are, and they're all at various levels engaging in this topic. They're all doing some great things. They often have really strong sustainability leads who are passionate about exactly as you say, finding a way to carry on living on this planet and also carry on travelling. So the first thing we do, as is so often the way with the Alliance, is get those people together. We have an environmental sustainability board, and we get those experts together, and they get immense value before they do anything for us by talking to each other and sharing experiences and finding ways to get things done across the airline. Of course, where it gets interesting and different is when they start putting their heads together and saying, well, maybe we could do more together. And that's really where the idea of the investment fund that I mentioned came from. By collectively working together, we can put a lot more clout behind an investment fund. And what we see there particularly is the challenge of generating sustainable aviation fuel. As we look forward, sustainable aviation fuel will be a really key part of how we solve this problem for a lot of the way through to 2025. And it's what we need right now, and it's what we need to sustain and build as we go. There's some good progress going on. There's, I think, as an industry, something like 100 million tons of sustainable aviation fuel were produced last year. It's going to be 2 million tons this year. So that's great. There's growth, but there's still not enough, and it's still too expensive. If you look at it as how will this actually help us get to the goal? We need more, and we need something different. We need some breakthroughs to Cornwall. So we've partnered with the Breakthrough Energies Fund. Funds to set up something. We're not experts in investment, as you can imagine, and we are not experts in the technology. But by partnering with these guys and pooling our funds, and also then bringing in others in the industry, we very much hope to sign up some interesting companies who aren't airlines, but are nevertheless very much part of this whole ecosystem to find ways to leapfrog where we currently are and really get that investment and interest in the technologies that are come along, the next generation, the generation after that are going to be the ones that unlock the price points and so on. So it's very, very exciting, pretty different from what we would normally be doing, and a fair bit different maybe from what some of the airlines could contemplate doing by themselves.
Yeah, so I find this this whole topic really fascinating, just because when we look at the industry that we want to see grow, and because it's one thing to look at the industry as it is today and think about how do we make it more sustainable, and try and drive down some of those negative impacts. The reality is this industry is going to continue to grow, and the expectations are the number of global travelers will double in the next 25 years. So between 2025 and 2050. And so we've got this, new problem, which is that, how do we create like a truly sustainable experience? And especially we got younger travelers who are more interested in the eco-friendly options. So they're increasingly saying that, they'll look for sustainable tourism as a preferred choice of travel. And, some people are saying, I'll take rail, or, I'll avoid taking a short haul flight. We've seen that in Europe. And I want to get into the European market too with you in a moment. But just to finish off on this incredibly important topic, because I know we've got lots to cover. When it comes to the technology, infrastructure, some of the other things, what else is there beyond fuel? And I know one of the things, certainly with Airbus and Boeing, there's been a big focus because fuel is expensive. It's not only that it's unfortunately polluting, it's very expensive. And so I know one of the initiatives that's been underway is to try and reduce the amount of fuel that these planes use, to reduce cost, and then also reduce the impact. So tell us, if you wouldn't mind, just some of the other ways that airlines are looking at this to achieve that, because it is a very big and important goal to get to net zero. But yeah, what are some of the other initiatives out of interest? And the reason I ask is because what should travelers be paying attention to? What are the signals they should be looking at from their airline partners to say, yes, they're on the right track, they get it, here's all the things they're doing? Because everyone's concerned about, just the perspective of it and feeling good about themselves, but not then realizing, wait a second, it's not that meaningful. So yeah, tell us some of the things that are underway beyond the fuel, or how that works, and what travelers should be looking for.
Yeah. So you mentioned the large items there. There are all sorts of exciting potential ideas out here. We are sadly a significant time off some of the really exciting stuff around new fuel, radically different fuel technologies, aircraft type, and so on. What will get us there, what we need to get us there, is the sustainable aviation fuel we've been talking about. It's airframe technology. Through my life, it's been astonishing to see how efficient airline travel has got in fuel terms. Every generation that comes along, there's another big slice off the fuel burn, and that needs to carry on, and that will carry on, and that will be a significant part. So one thing, and you can track this stuff now. You can look as a consumer and say, well, whose fleet is in the best state? And airlines are working really hard on that. And obviously, there's a limit to how quickly you can turn your fleet over, and there's some well advertised constraints in the system at the moment in terms of aircraft delivery. But we're all pushing that one as much as we can. The unsung hero in this is efficient operations. And I say unsung. For a long time, there's been a focus. Airlines have focused on efficient operations just because, as you say, fuel is really expensive and has a habit of getting excruciatingly expensive when things get really difficult. So all airlines want to be efficient, even if there was no such thing as global warming. But global warming adds to that. And there is still a lot of stuff that can be done. Just like, any business continues to find ways of cutting costs. Our members are continually trying to innovate in terms of their processes in, how they taxi around the airport. How do they do that most efficiently? How do they switch the aircraft on and get going, with preconditioned air and everything else, so that in the most efficient way, minimizing the amount of time they're burning fuels that emit greenhouse gases and maximising the uptime for everything else. So those are the three core things. I would love to tell you that there's some other magic out there, and the rate at which technology changes, who's to say what'll come? But those are going to be the three real key ones, and the ones you should watch for whether your airline has a good story or not.
Yeah. Well, one thing I'm just going to quickly add to that, Roger, because I'm sure my son will love this because he's becoming a pilot. We spent a lot of years traveling as a family, and he's always been the one. We did a around the world trip when our kids were 12 for 3 months, and he was responsible for all the airline decisions. And so to your point about actually making so of course he wanted to fly on an Emirates 380 to Dubai. That was one of his on his wish list. But one of the other interesting ones that was as well was Ethiopian Airlines at the time had just had their new fleet of Airbus 350s. And what I found really fascinating about that, and I just wanted to share this with our listeners, and because it's the point that you made, Roger, so I just want to underscore that, which is that when you're looking at who you should fly with and you're looking at the fleet, that is obviously because unfortunately the A380, despite being a beautiful aircraft and one of my favorites, and a gorgeous double decker that's now effectively they stopped production. It's such a shame, I think, in many ways. But one of the big reasons for that is the cost to operate that plane. And so the idea was scale to be able to have that capacity, but there's so many other more compelling options now that are far more fuel efficient and that can fly long distances. And so the Airbus A350 being one example of that. But what I wanted to highlight to our listeners is like when even my wife and I heard that my son wanted to fly Ethiopian, we didn't have a perspective on Ethiopia as being, as it turns out, and rightly so, it is the number one airline in Africa, and they've invested very significantly in this new fleet. And so I just wanted to highlight that to our listeners that, when you take a moment and do some analysis, you may hear of an airline and then all of a sudden realize, wait a second, they have just upgraded their fleet. And so one that you might think is a smaller regional carrier or would not be as up to snuff is actually leading the way.
And I would raise you for Ethiopia, I would shout out to Royal Air Maroc, our member in North Africa. Very ambitious growth plans, really exciting company, relatively new member to oneworld. They've been in since 2000, and they are investing in their fleet exactly in those terms. And going forward, there you're going to see your son may want to check them out as an alternative.
We'll be right back. Dan Christian here from Travel Trends. If you're a travel advisor looking for the next big thing in group travel, then you need to know about WeRoad. WeRoad is a community-driven, small group travel brand that is designed for today's connection-seeking traveler. Their secret? About 90% of WeRoaders start solo and end up with a whole new crew of friends. These trips run in tight-knit groups and are led by one of over 4,000 trained travel coordinators whose entire mission it is to spark connection from day one. WeRoad is built for travelers in their 20s, 30s, and 40s who want same age, same language groups. And with over 300,000 travelers already on board, the demand is real. And for trade, this is where it gets exciting. WeRoad's new trade program gives advisors competitive land commissions, flexible holds, toolkits, training, dedicated support, and co-marketing opportunities. Plus, flights aren't included, meaning you control the air, ancillaries, and pre-post stays. So it's time to partner with WeRoad. Give your clients the group trip they'll actually brag about. Head to weroad.com/welcome-travel-advisors to get started. That's weroad.com/welcome-travel-advisors.
Planning your next trip abroad? Stay connected the smart way with Olafly, the global leader in eSIMs for travelers. With coverage in over 200 destinations and a 4.6 out of 5 Trustpilot rating, Olafly is the go-to for international travel. Forget fumbling with SIM cards. Olafly's eSIM activates instantly with a QR code. You'll be online in just 2 minutes with unlimited data and no surprise roaming charges. Whether it's a short getaway, frequent business travel, or life as a digital nomad, Olafly has a plan for you. Get started today at esim.olafly.com. That's esim.holafly.com. In a world of endless travel options, how do you guarantee quality? The answer is curation, and it's the core of Civitatis, the leading marketplace for global tours and activities. Instead of just more options, their promise is more quality. Their experts handpick the best from over 90,000 activities in 4,000 destinations worldwide, ensuring every tour meets the highest standards of quality, availability, and price. They focus this winning strategy on capturing the world's fastest growing customer market, travelers from Latin America. By connecting these travelers to their global portfolio of experiences in native Spanish or Portuguese, Civitatis creates the powerful customer loyalty your business can count on. Their model is a proven formula for generating massive demand and driving industry-leading conversion. For the travel trade, the message is clear. Partnering with Civitatis is your strategy for capturing the massive outbound Latin American market and turning their growth into your revenue. Visit Civitatis.com for more details.
And now, back to the show. Moving on from sustainability, the one other thing I wanted to make sure we talked about on this series is the global nature of aviation, because you think about those two major aircraft manufacturers, most people are bidding on those. Of course, there's Bombardier. There's been some more consolidation in this space, but really there's the two major airlines. So despite the fact you may be traveling in Asia Pacific or Europe or North America, there is certainly some consistency to the fleets that they offer and the planes that they buy either from Europe or for the US. So, but what I wanted to get into is how the different markets vary from your point of view. Asia Pacific, I know we just spoke about Africa, but I really wanted to get your take on Europe in particular, because Europe, I would say much like the US, is obviously a very competitive market. There's a huge amount of consumers and demand. There's obviously been this big focus on ultra low cost airlines, for better and for worse, in both of those markets. So you have, Ryanair, EasyJet, some of those competing in the marketplace. And so when we think about the European market being highly competitive, how do some of the established carriers compete in that world and with oneworld? Because I often think of the alliances as the primary benefit of being long haul international travel. But when people are traveling purely within Europe, how do you make sure that people are still traveling with oneworld airlines? So tell us a little bit about the European market.
Yeah. Well, yes, it's a market very dear to my heart. And when I was back at BA, one of the things I did was work on business planning, and at the time it was we were putting together the plan for the first sort of the first few years out from merging with Iberia, and short haul and the competition of low cost carriers was very much something that was in our minds. It's essential that you find a way of competing as a large network carrier. It's not that you will beat these guys for growth. And I have to say, you said for better, for worse. I think the brilliant thing that low-cost carriers have done is change the conversation and the customer perceptions about what air travel could be. And while we can all gripe about certain aspects of the way they fling things, ancillaries at you when you buy a product or whatever, basically they're running quality airlines and they're delivering at a very, very low price point. And they've taken a lot of stuff out that maybe the bigger guys were offering by default and didn't need to. So they did some very smart things. You can't beat them for scale, maybe, but absolutely we want to be winning the battle to pull people out of Europe when they're going on wider journeys, and we need to be very relevant and therefore cost competitive. So if you look at our members now, they will be able to match maybe not the absolute rock bottom lowest sort of lead-in fares that you get with some of these guys of £5 or whatever, but they can match realistic lead-in economy fares. So that's a fundamental. What we're really trying to do is, though, that business of taking you beyond the shores of Europe, and we are well positioned with when you look at where people want to go out of Europe, we're absolutely fantastic across the North Atlantic with American and BA and Iberia and Finnair all together in a joint business. Iberia are growing very rapidly to Latin America, and then when you look out Asia woods, there's Finnair and there's our amazing brands of Cathay and JAL, where we're very strong, and in the Middle East we're the only alliance with three members, and again Skytrax number one, Qatar. We have some fantastic offerings there. So it's a combination of things, and we are a slightly different model from some of the low-cost guys. We have to be relevant versus them, but we're really about those larger scale travel needs.
Yeah, well, you bring up something interesting there too, and I want to just quickly touch on this, because one of the things I want to ask you about is business travel and corporate travel compared to kind of the mass economy travel that is really kind of one of the big drivers of our industry. But when we rewind, and obviously this is even more your time than mine, but there's not much difference in age between the two of us. But so the golden age of travel, when people were flying from London to New York on a BA flight with the idea like the glorious 747, if there was pianos on the upper level floor and even people standing having drinks and smoking at the time, if we go that there was this idea that travel was glamorous. And then what also came with that is all this service and the amenities. And one of the things I didn't realize, Roger, until my son was heading off to become a pilot, I found it really fascinating. This is obviously something you know, but I just want to share with our listeners, because I found it so interesting that the airline dress code was really modeled after the ship industry, because we needed to convince people that they could travel safely on ships. So we'd have the captain out there with his hat and his looking like almost like military, so that people know they've established, they've got experience. And so you'd have a confidence of going on a ship with this crew. And the same thing with an airline. They're dressed appropriately, they're titled appropriately, they give you confidence to take to the skies. And so our industry was heading in a direction that was this golden age of travel. And then all of a sudden, this idea that, wait a second, we don't have to serve everyone food, and we can dramatically reduce the cost. And then you had this, in the 90s and beyond, companies like Southwest and the different ultra low cost carriers coming into the market. And what I find now, and this is coming back to my question, what I find now is that customers are expecting more again. So what we're seeing, and I'll use the example here in North America for many of our listeners that are US and Canada. There was WestJet that was formed on the model of Southwest in Canada. And if you look at companies like Porter Airlines, which is one of the newer carriers in Canada that has expanded dramatically, they took this model of they started adding in those services again. And all of a sudden, and any of those flights, you would get free drinks, including alcohol. And so now Air Canada is being forced to reintroduce things that they took away to try and reduce costs. And as you know better than me, a lot of the larger established carriers, in a response to this, they had to introduce their own flanker brands. They had to introduce their own versions of low-cost carriers to compete. They needed separate unions, separate airlines, airplanes, and because they couldn't compete in their core business. And they also didn't want to be mindful of competing in the core business, because they needed to also pay attention to the affluent corporate traveler. So they created these, their own version of low-cost airlines. So my broader question to you on this topic, and then narrow it to, is like, where do you see that in Europe today as far as the trends in 2026 on beyond? Are you seeing more downward pressure on prices to focus on low-cost carriers? Are you seeing what we're seeing here a bit more in North America, where consumer expectations are increasing and some of the low-cost carriers are adding in some of the perks, and then some of those established carriers are re-adding in some of the things they used to do? Where do you see, I guess, that marketplace? And then I'd love to ask you a bit about business travel and corporate travel.
Yeah, and sure, and I think we're seeing some of the what you talk about. We're certainly seeing the low cost guys recognizing the importance of connectivity with some of the larger network carriers, and whereas once upon a time they completely, you bought your point-to-point ticket on the low-cost carrier. There was no way of connecting in a reasonable way with others. I think they recognise now that is something that is a business that is important for them to be in. In terms of what you get as part of the product, it depends so much what you're doing and where you're going. And if we'll talk about business, but if you want to fly on business, you want to arrive in a decent state, and it's it's your job, and you don't need to be maybe like you were with your piano and your cigarette in the 70s, but you do need to be in a way where you can actually transact some business when you get there, and that means a certain amount in terms of product and food and comfort and so on, and increasingly we see. There's some interesting economic times we live in, but there's a lot of people who are increasingly keen to see premium as a leisure thing. We sell round the world fairs. You mentioned going round the world. If I'm a geek about anything, it's round the world travel now, because we sell a lot on online and through the trade in oneworld. That's an incredibly premium product. 75-80% of the people who buy that product are traveling in premium cabins, and I think that's been a sort of fascination thing to a lot of airlines. They've got this business product, and it turns out actually people just want that product for their leisure travel, provided it's special leisure travel, or it's far enough, or it's it's the right occasion or whatever. So yeah, we see that that kind of mixture playing out, and that's the sign of a good competitive environment, isn't it? We're all trying to adjust the model to get those sweet spots to hit the customers.
Yeah. Well, you raised another really interesting point there too, Roger, about the trade and their relevance. So let's quickly touch on that as well. But just before we do, tell us about the trends as it relates to premium and I say corporate, but obviously the corporate's business travel, and business travel is not always. Business travel itself is not always luxurious, and it's not always first class. So a lot of business travel is still economy. But what I want to specifically ask is about the front of the plane, as my dad always used to joke about. Like, he would used to text me because my dad he grew up in the dockyards in Portsmouth. I was born in England, and he was always a shipman for many years, and he just loved airlines too. And I think that's where my son gets it from. And he would always say to me, he's like, "Oh, are you at the front of the plane?"
Yeah.
And I would take pictures, and the engine would be behind me, and he was like, "Oh, glorious," So he was always he always wanted. It was very much a romance for him to be in first class, and he loved when I was traveling business first class. So tell us about that cabin class and how you're seeing that in 2026 and beyond. Is that as important as ever, growing in importance? Tell us about the business of first class travel.
Yeah, it's as important as ever. It's a really, really key part of what we do. When you look at our network, from a share point of view, if you look at the seat share of oneworld overall, and then look at the share of premium seats, you will generally see a pretty significant jump between those two. We have some airlines with pretty big premium cabins. We, as a group, we prioritise premium travel. And that's a key differentiator for us with the other airlines, and of course everything that goes with it, not just the premium seat, but the lounges, the service, the processes, and so on. So yeah, absolutely, it's an important thing, and from what we see, it continues to be, although it comes and goes. What airlines have got very effective at is well, if business is down a little bit, maybe we can dial leisure up in the premium cabin. They are very good now at selling premium in a variety of ways. Of selling upgrades into premium when they can't sell the fares directly, and we want to do a little bit more of that across the alliance ourselves. So yeah, absolutely, premium is a core part of business. And you talk about the glamour of airline travel. Maybe I wouldn't use the word glamour, but there is a deep pleasure about flying in comfort, as your dad would require you to do, which I think is still very much there, despite the fact everything is much more efficient and costs keep coming down.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned about the upgrades, because there's a company called Plusgrade that I'm sure you're familiar with that, happens to be based in Montreal, Canada, which is, a multi-billion-dollar organization now. And they've got 250 airlines, I guess, they work with worldwide, and they've been very focused on this loyalty space. But the whole concept of their business model, from the CEO and founder, was this idea of looking at first class and saying, why are these empty seats? You could make revenue off of these, so let's give people the opportunity to bid on them, or to just make sure you fill that cabin. And obviously, that's what I find so interesting about the airline industry, is you have companies like that come along that offer a software as a service, and the airlines buy into it. And so this is where innovation happens in so many different ways within the industry. And that's, I guess, just wanted to highlight that as one example. Now, we've talked a little bit about the European market. I would love to get your take on the global market and then what's ahead for travel in 2026. So when you think about the growth opportunities, and the reason I want, your role is quite unique in this series, and another reason why we wanted to have you as a part of it is that you do have a global view, and you are based in one of the best cities of the world. I do love London. I spend a lot of time in London, and everyone always says like it's the best place to be based if you're a traveler, because you can get anywhere in the world from London Heathrow. You got multiple airports, so many carriers for Europe and the world. But since you sit in that Greenwich Mean Time position and have a global view from the UK, where do you see the growth opportunities when you look from your vantage point and you look to Asia Pacific and see all the traveler potential in that market? You look to the US or South America. Like, where are you seeing the growth? Where are you seeing kind of the big opportunities?
Yeah, well, certainly we're seeing a huge amount of growth potential in the Far East, in Asia, and certainly in South America. I mean, there's it will be like this just because of the structure of the global economy. We've developed. A lot of the world is very developed, and a lot of the world is still developing, and that's where you see the really exciting growth, and you see big populations coming up into that set of people who aspire to travel. So yeah, there are places like that will drive the growth going forward. There's still growth to come in across the globe, though, and while we need to be cognizant of our sustainability goals, there is something which is, I'm trying not to be self-serving and defending the airline industry, but there is something about, the ability to travel across the world is an important thing for the future of the world. And I would argue away, we've got to be able to do it at sustainability, but we've also got to recognise that we're privileged, those of us who do a lot of it, and it's a wider. There are a lot more people out there who want that privilege as well.
Well, I was going to quickly say I'm glad that you actually mentioned South America. I know the reason I actually even brought it up is because I was just recently in Chile, and we were in Patagonia. It was spectacularly beautiful, and it's very clear that area of the world is experiencing a real tourism boom. And if anything, there's a real concern there just to try and protect the environment as they're building up more accommodation, and they need more capacity. And we had to take 3 flights. It took me 2 days and to get there because of the flight path. So because it was 4 flights to get there, and the last flight we were on stopped in multiple airports, and then we stayed on our flight. It just showed you how complex it was to get there, as opposed to and in the future there'll be more direct routes, there'll be more airports. So for sure, South America is one to highlight. The other thing I just wanted to quickly comment on too is the one thing you didn't mention. I'm sure it's still top of mind, but is the Middle East. And one of the things that we certainly saw going back 10 or 15 years, as you looked at both Emirates and all the carriers in that region upgrading their fleets. We're now seeing that in India, of course, too. But as you saw a lot of those, I mentioned the A380. One of the things that I obviously came to understand and learn, especially living in Australia, was the importance of that region as a hub. From London via the Middle East en route to Australia, and that was one of the beautiful things about the A380. It was going to reduce the price of travel from Australia to England. You could have these glorious stopovers, and a lot of those countries invested in these planes because they would become a hub, and Dubai being a great example of that. And one of the things I'm seeing now, Roger, is that most of the investment in that region is in hotels and accommodation because they've put the investment into the airlines, and now they need to build up their capacity, and Saudi is a part of that. But I really like that you mentioned Asia and South America as 2 big growth markets, because they as you said, they're still undeveloped relative to population and people's interest in traveling there.
Yeah, and just if I can come back on the Middle East point, absolutely, it's an important growth market, and to link it back to the conversation we were having about how you bring airlines into the alliance. Oman Air is another airline that's joined us this year, along with Fiji Airways, and very much the thinking was this is a very attractive region. Oman serve a really interesting set of destinations, and they hit that spot of extending our network, bringing some fantastic destinations into around the world, being a great premium airline. And, I vividly remember the point at which I went down to see them. We were having the initial conversations about would this work in the alliance, and I hadn't actually flown them. And I walked on board and sat in a very nice seat, and the crew are amazing. The product is familiar in some ways, but very different in other ways. The food service is very different. The imagery that they're showing me on the video about where they fly, I'm thinking, where are these places? These are amazing. I've never heard of these places, and that's so that's the premium bit. That's the thing you're really looking for. And if you can find it in a growth market and it's additive to the network, that's such a sweet spot, and that's brilliant.
Yeah, no, for sure. I appreciate your take on that. And I just have a couple last questions for you, and I really want to get your view looking ahead. And so let's talk about aviation alliances, because obviously that was core to our conversation today, and also your role. So one of the things coming back to that is that the future of these alliances. You mentioned just there about some of the new partners that are coming in. How do you see this model evolving? Is it like deeper integration, shared loyalty? We talked a bit about the more or less the digital ecosystems, the data, and how things get shared. One of the things I also wanted you to comment on, if you wouldn't mind, Roger, in this regard, when I brought up the question about airports and airlines working together, one of the things that's very top of mind for many of our listeners is biometrics, because we talk about AI and technology, but one of the things you're certainly seeing at airports is a much more effective use of facial recognition to be able to both get you through customs and even actually boarding the aircraft. More carriers now are you're just scanning your face as opposed to actually having to check scan your boarding pass, have someone look at your passport. Like what we accept today as common practice, all of a sudden is about to change. That you just stare at a screen and you enter the plane. So this is where I'm thinking about the future and aviation alliances. How much of that is oneworld, for example, versus the airlines? But yeah, tell us a bit about the future of oneworld alliance and where you see the model evolving.
Yeah, so I maybe don't see massive transformations. I don't see. We're about delivering really smart technology to help our airlines communicate, rather than a single monolithic digital infrastructure on which underpins the whole alliance. And the reason for that is things change all the time. You look at the rate at which our airlines are changing their technology; they're responding to all sorts of things. So I think the role for alliance in that kind of environment continues to be smart connectivity, minimizing the effort that each airline needs to do to connect into a single point, and then a hub and spoke model to distribute that out. And we've got elements of that. You don't have an alliance unless you have some sort of data share capability. Increasingly, we're trying to deliver great processes for the customer through that kind of infrastructure, so that they can keep their preferred app and do a variety of things and unlock everyone else's process in a way that they understand and can interpret. So there's lots more to come on that, which I wouldn't necessarily describe as necessarily deeper integration so much as really smart integration that keeps the airline individuality there, but solves a load of complex translation problems behind the scenes. Loyalty, I think loyalty is a very sort of airline centric thing, and loyalty itself as a business can be starkly different. You look at the kind of financial setup of a loyalty scheme in the US versus one in Australia versus one in Europe. There's some big differences there. So again, I don't think we're in the business of launching a single platform anytime soon. But there's so much more to be done to get these schemes talking to each other and make it as easy as possible for you, who I'm now taking as a personal challenge to try and entice more into oneworld. Now you've admitted that you actually like some of our airlines. I want to try and drag you away from where you do a lot of your flying. So it's those kind of things that I think you will see more of, which is maybe not as exciting as saying there's a big transformation, but there's sitting from where I sit, there's an awful lot more we can do and we need to do.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. The one thing I would, one of my hopes and takeaways from this series, and then I'm keen to get yours, and then make sure people can find out more information about oneworld, B2B and B2C. But one of the things I just thought I would share that has really come up from our conversation today is the returning to the joy of air travel, because a lot of people certainly complain about, it's like it's the most challenging part of their trip is I just rather just be there. I just rather be just transported to the destination. And my son was the one that alerted me to this, because he said it was his favorite part. It's like his favorite part of our travels is the airports and airlines. and so I'm like, how do we actually get more people thinking like that, where it's like they're super excited about the carrier, and part of that for sure, at least for me, is when you're traveling business and you have lounge access. I mean, that is the difference between like flying and love flying, because you're really looking forward to having that experience. But yeah, so that's one of my hope as a takeaway from this series, is that people will kind of relook at what is for some of those people that are road warriors or leisure travelers that don't see this as part of the exciting part of travel, but actually it is one of the most important parts of the whole experience, is how you get there.
Yeah, and I absolutely, and we want to do more from making those spaces great for the customer. We're relatively late to the lounge business, but we have 2 oneworld lounges now. The one in Incheon has just won Asia's best business lounge for 2025, which is fantastic. So we have a lounge in Seoul, which is not a home base for any of our member airlines, but a lot of our members fly there. And you can wander into a space which has been designed to kind of take you, well, I think your son will like it. So it's there's a bit of you've got these amazing windows. You can look out on the tarmac. You see all these aircraft. You know where you are. You know what's going on. But you've got a space that's designed to give you a bit of a break and respite from where you're going. And this is not a really expensive lounge. We've done this in a way that keeps costs down as much as possible. But it gives customers a variety of spaces to wander through and maybe take a breath and enjoy. I'm certainly one of these people. I maybe do a bit more travel than my family would like nowadays, but there's it is for me a chunk of the pleasure of the job. You are doing something fundamentally pretty remarkable. You talk about your dad. My dad went on a plane once in his life when I took him on a BA flight, and he was blown away and grew up at a time when there were a lot less planes around, and it's a remarkable thing that airlines are managing to do, and all their supporters around the ecosystem, and wherever you're sitting, whatever's going on, if you've got a crew member who can empathise with you, and you can look out the window and see an amazing view. It's a special thing. Yeah, no, this is I really agree, and let's close off on that, because I was I appreciate you sharing that, certainly about your dad and my dad, because it puts things in perspective, right? And so I want to make sure that any of our listeners can find out more about oneworld, whether it be for partners that might be interested in collaborating with you, or even also just to make sure customers know where to go if they want to sign up. So tell us, Roger, what the best ways for people listening to this to be able to engage with oneworld. Yeah, if you want information, go to oneworld.com. You can buy a round the world ticket. I will be very happy to help you through that process. You can see the lounges we offer. You can understand what you can get for your loyalty benefits, and you can increasingly transact business with us. So coming early next year in 2026 will be our meetings and events product. So helping travel buyers book and plan events in cities where they're moving 50 plus people, maybe 100, 1,000 people into a place for a sales conference or something. And we want to add more tools like that. So yeah, that's your first point. With our wonderful AI staff tool, hopefully you can just accost anyone in an airport and say, I don't get this about oneworld. What about this? And that'll, of course, take a little bit of time to to come through. So those are the key ways. Talk to the amazing teams we've got and get online.
Well, the one thing I'll just leave our listeners too with is that you mentioned about the oneworld lounges and the emphasis there. One of the things that came up for me last year in my travels is some of my colleagues when we were flying oneworld through Heathrow and connecting was the fact that they wanted to go to the gin bar and have a G&T, which I know Qantas, Cathay, BA, like this is a very popular thing that I only just discovered, that you can go and have a fantastic gin and tonic. And it's one of those things that, well, it's only if you're traveling with oneworld and have access to that lounge, but it is, it was a really cool experience. So if you find yourself in that situation, you have a layover and you have access, experience the oneworld lounges and treat yourself to a gin and tonic. So on that note, cheers to you, Roger. Thank you so much for being a part of this. And I look forward to keeping in touch, but yeah, thank you for being a part of this series. And I look forward to future collaborations together.
Thank you. Real pleasure, Dan. Thank you. Really appreciate what you're doing and I'm very happy to be part of it.
Thanks so much for joining us on our latest episode of Travel Trends. I really hope you enjoyed our episode 1 of our 3-part series on aviation, featuring Roger Blackburn, the VP of Loyalty and Commercial over at oneworld. Next week, we have Patrick Stedman, who's the head of disruption over at Hopper. And of course, we have our contest, and I'll be announcing our very first winner on next week's episode. So make sure over the next few days, you post a highlight from that matter, a simple call out to say, I love the experiences episode with Michael Zeissner, can't wait for season 7, or I really enjoyed the episode with Travis Pittman from Tour Radar. Whatever appealed to you over the course of this season, let us know on the social channels, tag at Travel Trends Podcast, and you'll be entered to win one of 3 sets of Hayes luggage. Thanks again to the team at Hayes for sponsoring this series. Definitely be subscribed on the streaming platform of your choice to be notified when any of these new episodes go live, including the Spotlight episode featuring the Hayes CEO Emran Sheikh that'll be going out this week. And of course, we post clips and highlights on all our social channels, LinkedIn, Instagram, and YouTube. So be sure to check that out for clips from today's conversation with Roger and all the upcoming episodes from our aviation series. Thanks again to all of our listeners for supporting our show. I'm so excited about 2026. I look forward to seeing many of you on the road. We are just sending out our newsletter for the month, so you can see all the events that we're going to be attending, which you can check out on our website as well, traveltrendspodcast.com/events. Until next week, safe travels.